Hello, I'm Jian Li, a computer vision researcher at Omnis Labs Company. In this lecture, we will learn about functions and how to create and use functions in Python. From now on, it is recommended to program in script mode. This is because the length of the code to be written will become longer and longer, and all the remaining lectures will be conducted in script mode. Execute the following code in immediate mode and script mode. If you type 1 plus 1 to the Python shell, you will see the number 2. However, if we write 1 plus 1 in the file 1 plus 1.py and run this file in script mode, we can't see anything on the screen. If we run the code in script mode, we cannot check the evaluation result of an expression on the screen. When you run a program in script mode, you cannot interact with the Python interpreter, unlike when you use the Python shell. So we have to utilize a function called print. Print is a function used to print variables or values on the terminal. Let's make a program that prints your hometown to the terminal. First, open VS Code and click File and then New File. Save the file name as hometown.py. In the future, it is recommended to save codes written in each lecture. For example, we can write a simple program that prints your hometown as follows. You can print something to the terminal or command prompt by using the print function. After saving the code you wrote, you can run the program in script mode by clicking Run without debugging in the menu of VS Code, or clicking the Run button at the top right. At the bottom of the VS Code, you will see a Terminal tab as shown. If you cannot find Terminal, click Terminal and then New Terminal from the menu to open Terminal window. If you run the code by clicking the Run button, you can see the execution result of the program at the bottom. If you run the code, you can see your hometown is sold on the terminal. Now you learned how to print a variable or value on the screen in script mode. You may be wondering, can't we put something into the computer? Of course it is possible. To answer this question, let's learn the function called input. There are many ways to put something into a computer, but in this course, we will use the keyboard input. Let's write a string between parentheses after input as shown below. When you run this program, you will see the string asking for your hometown in the terminal, and then nothing happens. At this point, the user has to type something in the terminal. Click the terminal window, type New York City and press enter. Then we will see the string we wanted to print. Like this, the input function is used to receive a string input from a keyboard after printing the message in parentheses and pass this input to a certain variable. So far, we have used functions called print and input. If you look closely, you'll see that both input and print, which are called functions, have parentheses behind them. And it seems that it is possible to put a variable or a value inside these parentheses. Also, it seems that things like print and input are basically provided in Python. Functions that are available by default in Python are called built-in functions. A function is a named code block. When creating a function, first write def, put a space after def, then write the function name and parentheses. Then between the parentheses, write the parameter variables that can be put into the function. And after closing the parentheses, add colon and press enter to change the line, indent the line, and write the code block you want to write. If you don't need a parameter, you can leave the parentheses blank. And if you have more than one parameter, you can create multiple parameters with commas. There are many reasons to use functions, but let's look at the example to understand reasons why we use functions. Andrew, who lives in New York, checks the weather forecast for a trip to Paris next week. But strangely, it seems that the temperature in Paris is too low for the summer. So Andrew tries to understand why the temperature is so low. Andrew discovers that the temperature is in Celsius, not Fahrenheit. Let's make a simple program for Andrew, an American who is familiar with Fahrenheit temperature. How should we convert Celsius to Fahrenheit? Also, for Andrew unfamiliar with kilometers per hour, let's change the wind speed unit from kilometers per hour to miles per hour. First, look at the formula for calculating the Fahrenheit temperature from the Celsius temperature. Now, let's create a program that prints the temperature in Fahrenheit when the user inputs the temperature in Celsius. First, create a new file called cell2var.py. Let's write the following program based on the formula. For example, if the Celsius is 15, put the value of 15 in a variable called Celsius. Then, write an expression to convert Celsius to Fahrenheit value. Store the evaluated value of the expression in the variable Fahrenheit. And if we print this out, we can see that 15 degrees Celsius is 59 degrees Fahrenheit. But what if we want to convert all the temperatures in the 5-day forecast that Andrew wants to know? The easiest way is to copy and paste the code you wrote earlier while changing only the Celsius temperature variable. If you run the code, you get the result as expected. However, to reduce the length of this code, you can group the frequently reused code into a function. Now, let's implement a function to organize the code. Let's create a function called convertC2F. You can create the function as you learned earlier. On the top of the Python file, write def convertC2F Celsius. What goes into a block of code doesn't have much difference. Writing a function is simply making a music score. Therefore, if the function is not called, it is same as not playing the music score, so the process of calling the function is required. Calling a function is simple. Add parentheses after the function name, and if there are arguments to be placed between the parentheses, put the value in place of the parameter. Here, the value passed in the place of parameter at the time of calling the function is called argument, and the variable created in the parentheses of the function in defined part is called parameter. And note that the function must be defined before calling it. Although it is not shown here, the function must be defined at the top of the Python program before you call the function. If you run the code, the program that uses the function runs as expected, just like the code you wrote earlier. We can interpret this program like this. We first define a function called convertC2F. The function is remembered by the Python interpreter, and then the interpreter continues to read the code file. We create 5 variables and put the values into the function we made and call it. And repeat calling the function. Note that the name of the function should be easy to understand, such as convertC2F. Otherwise, when writing a program with a long code, it is impossible to know what the function does even though you wrote it. For example, do not use a, b, c, etc. as a function name or variable name, because you and other people cannot understand your code. I would like to explain the parameters and arguments again with the code we wrote. The day 1 Celsius to day 5 Celsius variables are used as values that are passed to a function when the function is called, so we can regard them as arguments of a function. On the other hand, the Celsius variable that was created when defining the function is called the parameter variable. A function will not be executed until it is called. Take a look at the following code and guess which strings will be printed in which order when you run this program. First, let's look at the execution result. You can see that the function is defined at the top, but the function is not executed until it is called. And you can see the strings are printed in the order of before, inside, after. In a Python program, code is executed sequentially from top to bottom. However, a function is not executed when it is defined. Thus, the first code to be executed is day 1 Celsius equals 15. And then, before calling function is printed, when the function is called, the parameter variable gets the argument value. After the right value is calculated, it is stored in variable Fahrenheit. Inside function is printed. Then Fahrenheit value is printed. When the function is finished, the interpreter terminates the function and goes back to where the function was called. Finally, after calling function is printed. Variables and parameters in functions are local. To put it simply, variables or parameter variables within the function can only be accessed within the function. Local variables inside a function are destroyed when the function ends. Let's look at the following example. Since the variable called Fahrenheit is a local variable inside the function, if you try to access it from outside the function, an error occurs. Let's look at another code. Considering that the function is not executed before being called, first 3 will be stored in A, and the function called hello will be executed. When the function called hello is executed, a variable called A is created inside the function, and when you print it, 1 is printed. Here, the variable A created inside the function is completely different from the variable A that exists outside of the function. And when the function is terminated, the variable A in this function disappears, and only the variable A outside of the function remains. So when we print variable A later, the variable A outside the function is same as before calling the function, so 3 is printed and the program ends. The convert C to F function we wrote earlier is a function that prints something, and this function does not return anything outside the function. Functions that do not return anything are called void functions. You may be puzzled by the sudden explanation of the keyword return. First, let's talk about the keyword return. The return keyword is a keyword used to terminate a function by passing the value inside the function to the outside of the function. If you want to return something to the place where the function is called, write return and put space. Then write a variable or a value to return. If we call a function with return statement, when the function ends, it returns the value or variable to the place where the function was called. For example, if you don't want to print the value in the convert C to F function and want to return the Fahrenheit value, you can use the return statement. If you want to terminate the function without returning anything outside the function, you don't need to write anything after the return keyword. Let's modify the convert C to F function we wrote. If you want to change the function to a function that returns the Fahrenheit value to the outside of the function, you can simply add return Fahrenheit at the end of the function. The value returned by the function can be used as value outside of the function. For example, it is possible to store the return value of the function in any variable. Now, let's convert wind speed as well as the temperature for Andrew. Similar to converting the temperature, we can write another function to convert the wind speed from kilometers per hour to miles per hour. Create a file named weather.py and save it in the same folder as cell2far.py. And let's write a function in a new file. Before moving on to the next slide, pause the video of this lecture and write kmph to mph function that converts kilometers per hour to miles per hour on your own. The conversion formula is shown in the slide. For example, the function could be written like this. kmph to mph function can be called from outside the function. For example, if you convert a speed of 10 kilometers per hour to miles per hour unit using the function, you get the following values. And try running the code again by adding the following line below the code you wrote earlier. %5.2f is a placeholder for the value of mph, which indicates in what format the value of the variable mph will be displayed. 5 means that the minimum space occupied by a number is 5 spaces. 2 means the limit on the number of digits after the decimal point is 2. F is used to indicate that float type value is placed in place of %5.2f. It's okay even if you cannot understand well now. You will learn more about formatting in another lecture. It is possible to define and call multiple functions in one file. For example, it is also possible to define convert_c_to_f function and kmph_to_mph function in one file and call the two functions. It is possible to call another function inside a function. For example, if the convert_c_to_f and kmph_to_mph functions are defined above the convert_all function, and then the two functions are called inside convert_all function, the convert_all function can return the value obtained by calling the two functions. The convert_all function can be called like this. Like in convert_all function, if you want to return more than one value from a function to the outside, you can use a comma. And you can store the two return values in the Fahrenheit and MPH variables using the comma on the left side of assignment statement. Now, let's modify the code so that the user can input the temperature and wind speed as they want. By using input function, we can get the Celsius and kmph values from the user in the terminal. But when we run this code, we get the following error message. This is because the user input value received by the input function is returned as string type. So the convert_c_to_f function throws an error. Because the string type was used in the process of calculating Celsius value. There is an easy way to fix this error. It is to convert the string type to integer or float type. If you want to receive an integer input from the user, you must convert the string to an integer type. And if you want to get a floating point number from the user, you need to change the string to a float type value. In Python, a value of one type can be changed into another, and changing a type of a value is called casting. For example, if you want to convert a string to an integer type, you can use the function called int. As shown in the slide, if we wrap the outside of the input function with int function, we can convert the input string type value to value of type int. If you want to convert the value to float type value, you can use float function instead of the int function. Finally, you can write the code that casts the user's input and then prints the converted values as follows. When we run the program, the temperature and the wind speed are printed out as expected. When the user inputs a Celsius value of 15 and a wind speed of 10 km per hour, the converted values are displayed well as shown in the slide. There are functions provided by default in the Python programming language. Print, input, int that we saw earlier are functions, but we can use them without defining them. Functions that can be used immediately are called built-in functions. In addition to this, there are various built-in functions such as abs, pow, min, and you will learn various built-in functions in our future lectures. We don't need to know all these functions for now, but if you want to learn more, you can access the link below and learn about more functions. Note that a function can also be an argument of another function. Here, passing function as an argument means putting the function name itself as an argument, not passing the return value obtained by calling a function. For example, the function print Fahrenheit shown in the slide is called with an argument convert_c_to_f. And this function assigns convert_c_to_f to a parameter called convertFunc and calls convertFunc with parentheses. If you look at the bottom line of the code, you can see that another function called convert_c_to_f is inserted as an argument to print Fahrenheit. For now, all you need to know that this is technically possible. You will not write this type of code in this course, but if you continue to study computer science or programming, you may write a function that receives another function as an argument. Now, let's solve a practice problem. Today, we will create a function that returns the wind chill temperature. The wind chill temperature refers to the temperature a person feels, not the actual temperature. Create a function called windChill TWS. Parameter T is the temperature in Fahrenheit, and parameter WS is the wind speed in miles per hour. You can check the formula on the slides. To give you a hint for writing the code, if you want to perform exponentiation in Python, you can use the exponentiation operator **. The wind chill function can be written like this. Like mathematics, we can use parentheses to clarify the order of calculations. As in the slide, if the value is multiplied by another number with exponent, put parentheses in the place where the exponentiation operation is performed, and the computer evaluates the expression inside the parentheses first. Now you can print the wind chill temperature by printing the return value of the function call. If you put 46 Fahrenheit and a wind speed of 12 miles per hour in the wind chill function and printed, the following value is printed. Thank you for watching. In the next lecture, we will learn about conditional statements. Thank you.